It was a sunny afternoon on a quiet street where life moved slowly, where neighbors knew each other by name and Sunday potlucks were still a thing. Miss Thelma, a 72-year-old black woman with soft silver curls and a presence as gentle as a lullaby, was walking home with groceries. She didn't know that this day would end in violence. She didn't know that someone sworn to protect her would be the one to hurt her. And neither did he, because the moment Officer Raymond struck her, the countdown to his own reckoning began. The whole town would soon be watching. Hey everyone, and welcome to Talecraft, where stories aren't just told, they're felt. If this is your first time visiting the channel, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe, because today's story might be the most shocking one we've ever covered. Let me ask you something. If this happened to your mother or grandmother, how far would you go for justice? Think about that as we dive into a heartbreaking case of police brutality, buried racism, and one son's powerful response. This isn't fiction. It's real. It's raw. And it reveals more about our world than we'd like to admit. Miss Thelma was doing what she'd done every Thursday, shopping, smiling at the store clerk, maybe stopping for a moment to compliment a stranger's baby. But in the blink of an eye, a simple misunderstanding with a white police officer turned explosive. Witnesses say she barely raised her voice. Others say she was confused but polite. Regardless, the officer reacted with violent force, leaving her unconscious and bleeding on the pavement. By the time paramedics arrived, her pulse was weak. What the officer didn't know was that Thelma wasn't alone. And her son? He was the last person you'd want to cross. Why does this story matter? Because behind every name in a headline is a life, a family, a legacy. Because racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a badge. And because too many voices go unheard until someone with power steps up. In this case, that power came from her son, but it shouldn't take status to matter. That's why we're telling this story. Because it's not just about one officer and one woman. It's about a broken system, silent witnesses, and the moment one son said, "Enough." Let's walk through what happened next step by step. It all started at the corner of Maple and 3rd, just outside a small neighborhood market. Miss Thelma had accidentally left her receipt in the store, and when the security alarm beeped, she paused, confused. The store clerk quickly waved, shouting, "It's okay, Miss Thelma." But Officer Raymond, who had just pulled up across the street, didn't see that part. He saw an elderly black woman standing still and heard the alarm. He approached fast, hand already near his belt, issuing rapid commands. Thelma, hard of hearing, didn't respond right away. And in that split second, the situation spiraled out of control. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Officer Raymond barked, towering over her. Thelma, flustered and clutching her purse, tried to explain. "I'm sorry, what did I do?" But Raymond wasn't listening. Witnesses say he shoved her, knocking the small paper bag of groceries from her hands. An apple rolled into the street. She stumbled. When she reached out to balance herself, maybe even instinctively touched his arm, he reacted. Fast. Violent. His fist connected with her face. She collapsed like a marionette whose strings were cut. The crowd gasped. A few people screamed. One young woman immediately pulled out her phone and started recording. People rushed forward, but Raymond raised his hand again. "Stay back. She assaulted me," he shouted. But the crowd wasn't buying it. "She didn't touch you," someone yelled. "She's 72, cried another. Paramedics arrived minutes later, pushing through the gathering crowd. Thelma wasn't moving. Blood stained her gray blouse. Her pulse was shallow. As she was lifted into the ambulance, the recording had already started making rounds online. Local news picked it up within hours. By nightfall, the footage was viral. And Raymond, still convinced he had handled a resisting suspect, had no idea that his actions were about to destroy his own career. Raymond went back to the station, filing a report claiming she had become aggressive and that he'd used necessary force. It was a story he thought would stick. After all, how many times had it worked before? But this time things were different. At the hospital, Thelma had slipped into a coma. Doctors confirmed facial fractures, internal bleeding, and a severe concussion. Her family was called in. And when her son arrived, everything changed. He didn't enter the hospital quietly. His car was swarmed by reporters. Because Thelma's son wasn't just any man. He was a former federal prosecutor and civil rights attorney. His name was Elijah Maddox. A man who had spent over 2 decades exposing police misconduct, arguing in front of federal judges, and leading investigations into systemic racism. He had once testified before Congress. Now, the victim of a senseless assault was his own mother. The irony wasn't lost on him, or the nation. That night, Elijah didn't speak to the press. He sat beside his mother's bed, holding her hand. But behind his silence, something powerful was building. Injustice had knocked on the wrong door. And the man behind it, Officer Raymond, was about to feel the full weight of accountability. The very next morning, Elijah filed an official misconduct complaint. He requested all body cam footage, demanded Raymond's immediate suspension, and began assembling a legal team. But what really made headlines was what he said during his first press conference. "My mother taught me to believe in the justice system. I intend to make sure it still believes in her." That quote exploded across social media. Celebrities retweeted it. Civil rights groups rallied. Raymond, once shielded by silence, now stood exposed. He had punched a grandmother, a beloved community member. And as the truth began to unravel, the panic in his eyes deepened, the media frenzy exploded. Local news stations ran the body cam footage leaked by an anonymous officer, and it contradicted everything in Raymond's report. Thelma hadn't raised her hands, hadn't shouted, hadn't resisted. Her expression was confused, her tone polite, even scared. But that didn't stop Raymond from punching her. As the video played on national television, anchors choked on their words. One commentator said, "I've covered a lot of police violence cases, but this one hurt to watch." It wasn't just brutality, it was cowardice, and the world was watching. Elijah Maddox, however, wasn't interested in sympathy. He was preparing for war. Elijah filed a multi-million-dollar federal civil rights lawsuit. He named the city, the police department, and Raymond individually. He demanded not just financial compensation but a full-scale investigation into police training and racial bias in the department. Protesters gathered outside City Hall. Old women in Sunday hats marched with signs reading "Justice for Thelma." Students staged walkouts. Church leaders held vigils. It wasn't just about one punch anymore, it was about every grandmother who'd been ignored, dismissed, or harmed. And Raymond? He'd been placed on administrative leave, a fancy way of saying, sit at home and wait for the storm to hit. Inside the department, tension grew. Officers whispered about Raymond's temper, his complaints history, and how this wasn't his first excessive force incident. One rookie cop anonymously told a reporter, "We all knew he was trouble. No one ever stopped him." Now the Internal Affairs Unit was racing to cover ground, opening every file with Raymond's name on it. Several of his former arrests were suddenly in question. Defense lawyers began filing motions to overturn past convictions. The DA's office started to squirm. Meanwhile, Elijah didn't flinch. He'd gone up against institutions before, but this time it was personal. This time it was his mother. At the hospital, Thelma remained in a coma. Machines beeped softly, marking the rhythm of her fragile life. Her grandchildren took turns holding her hand. Nurses brought in flowers sent by strangers across the country, some from as far as London and Lagos. One bouquet included a note that read, "For every black woman who raised us with grace, we stand with her." Elijah read every message aloud. But inside he was tormented. He'd always fought for other people's justice. Now he was praying he wouldn't lose the woman who had once marched in Selma, who had taught him everything he knew. Then a break. The nurse noticed movement. Slight but real. A finger twitched. Then her eyelids fluttered. Doctors rushed in. Elijah was called immediately. By the time he entered the room, Thelma had opened her eyes. Weak but aware. "Mama," Elijah whispered, holding back tears. Her lips parted. "You still stubborn?" she rasped. It was barely audible, but it broke him. He laughed and cried at the same time, resting his head on her shoulder. The entire staff stood outside, silently applauding. The fight wasn't over, but now Thelma was back. And Raymond had no idea that his worst nightmare had just awakened. Word of Thelma's awakening spread fast. Her face, once bruised and broken, was now on magazine covers, smiling weakly from her hospital bed. Interviews poured in. She spoke softly but clearly, "I forgive him, but I won't protect him." Her words hit like lightning. The country admired her grace, but Elijah wasn't done. He pushed forward with his demands: full police reform, public hearings, and independent oversight committees. The mayor, now under pressure, called an emergency press conference. For the first time in his career, he addressed systemic racism head-on. Raymond, once untouchable, now had nowhere to run, not even inside his own department. Raymond tried to shift the narrative. His lawyer claimed PTSD, said the officer had been under stress, and misread the situation. But no one bought it. Even conservative pundits avoided defending him. And when his personnel record leaked, showing multiple complaints, 2 unpaid suspensions and a history of violent outbursts, the city turned against him. His wife filed for divorce. His former colleagues stopped answering his calls. He was summoned to testify before a disciplinary board. But before he could, Elijah did something no one expected. He requested a public town hall, inviting Raymond to face the community. "Let him see what he's done," he said. That night, the town hall was packed beyond capacity. Cameras rolled. Thelma, still fragile, sat in a wheelchair near the front. Raymond entered under tight security. People booed. Some shouted. But Elijah raised his hand, asking for silence. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He simply listed the facts, the pain, the legacy of trauma. Then he paused and looked at Raymond. "You hit my mother. Now you face her." The room fell silent. Thelma wheeled forward. She looked up and said, "You don't scare me. But I pray you change." And in that moment Raymond's mask cracked. The reckoning had arrived. Back at the hospital, doctors did everything they could to stabilize Mrs. Eleanor. The staff were shaken, not just by the brutal injuries on an elderly woman, but by the sudden presence of multiple federal agents pacing the hallways. In the waiting room, a man in uniform stood tall, eyes fixed ahead. That man was Colonel Marcus Bell, decorated war hero, intelligence officer, and Eleanor's son. When he received the emergency call from the hospital, he chartered the fastest transport available. He wasn't just there as a son, he came representing something much larger, a network of justice that extended beyond city police. Detective Brooks, the officer responsible, was still trying to cover his tracks. He claimed Eleanor had resisted arrest, grown uncontrollable, and threatened him. But when Marcus Bell walked into the police precinct flanked by FBI agents and military legal counsel, everything changed. The station, once bustling with casual confidence, fell into tense silence. Marcus placed a single folder on the front desk, a detailed intelligence report documenting Brooks' past misconduct, sealed body cam footage and encrypted eyewitness statements. He had been investigating this department for a while. Eleanor's beating was the final straw that triggered a classified investigation to go public. The body cam footage left the FBI sickened. It showed the officer shoving Eleanor without provocation, dragging her across concrete and yelling racial slurs. She had done nothing but question why she was being stopped. The public defender watching the footage reportedly whispered, "This is no longer a case. This is a national disgrace." As word spread, news crews began arriving outside the station. Protesters gathered, holding signs bearing Eleanor's name. Officers inside scrambled to get ahead of the headlines, but it was too late. Marcus stood firm, not as a grieving son, but as a warrior refusing to let injustice win. Brooks tried to escape the backlash by resigning quietly. But Marcus had ensured every legal door was locked. Within hours, the Department of Justice filed federal civil rights charges. Not only was Brooks arrested, but his captain and 2 other officers were also placed on administrative leave pending investigation. What began as an act of cowardice now turned into a ripple effect of accountability. Marcus addressed the media with calm fury, "No one should have to fight for dignity. But if we must fight, we will not fight alone." His words echoed across the nation, and so did Eleanor's story. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained in a coma, unaware of the movement her suffering had sparked. Cards and letters flooded the hospital. Children drew pictures of her. Celebrities posted online in support. One nurse said, "It's like the entire country is standing outside her door, waiting for her to wake up." And through it all, Marcus never left her side. He knew his mother was a fighter. And he also knew that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring what should have never been taken. The courtroom date was set. America would be watching, not for vengeance but for truth, reform, and hope. In the aftermath, police departments across the state announced emergency training reviews. Eleanor's story became a case study in law schools and police academies. It wasn't just about a bad cop anymore, it was about a broken system exposed by the pain of one innocent woman and the courage of a son who refused to be silent. Marcus's name became synonymous with resilience. And as Eleanor lay in quiet healing, the world outside waited, not just for her recovery but for the message she embodied, that dignity once bruised can still rise, and with the right people behind it, it can roar. Weeks passed. The hospital walls that had echoed with silence now buzzed with cautious hope. One morning, Eleanor's fingers twitched. Nurses held their breath. Then her eyelids fluttered open. She was groggy, confused, but alive. The news spread like wildfire. Marcus was at her side in seconds, tears in his eyes, not the hardened military man the world saw, but a grateful son whispering, "Welcome back, Mama." Eleanor could barely speak, but her eyes searched his face. And in that moment she saw not just her son, but a man who had moved mountains to protect the values she'd raised him on. As Eleanor slowly regained strength, Marcus briefed her on everything. The court proceedings, the national protests, the sea of supporters. She wept, not for herself but for every name that hadn't gotten this kind of justice. "Why me?" she whispered. Marcus gently replied, "Because your voice became thousands." The judge's ruling came swiftly. Officer Brooks was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison without parole. The department was placed under federal supervision. Eleanor's name became a symbol, a rallying cry for justice and dignity. But for Marcus, it wasn't just about courtroom victories, it was about making sure the world changed for good. In a powerful televised interview, Eleanor spoke from her hospital bed. "This isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. I'm just one voice. But I've learned one voice is enough to shake a system, if it's loud enough." Her words became the backbone of a new foundation Marcus started in her name, the Eleanor Bell Initiative for Justice, focusing on police accountability, civilian oversight, and elderly protection. Donations poured in. Schools, neighborhoods, even prisons invited Marcus to speak. What began as trauma now transformed into a movement shaped by resilience and legacy. Months later, Eleanor finally left the hospital to a crowd of supporters lining the streets. Children waved signs that read, "Welcome home, Nana Bell," as local choirs sang Amazing Grace. The mayor handed her the city's humanitarian award. But Eleanor, humble as ever, simply said, "I'm just thankful I lived long enough to see love rise from hate." Marcus wheeled her to a modest stage where she addressed everyone, her voice still soft but every word carried weight. "Let this be the last time an elder is dragged instead of defended. Let this be the first step in real accountability." 1 year later, the city unveiled a mural in Eleanor's honor, painted on the very wall she had once been thrown against. The same bricks that once scraped her skin now held her portrait, radiant and strong, surrounded by butterflies and doves. Local artists volunteered their time, and schoolchildren contributed designs. Marcus stood beside her, his arm steady behind her wheelchair, and smiled. "You didn't just survive, Mama," he said, "you changed the world." That mural became a sacred site. People left flowers, notes, and candles. Officers new to the force were brought there during training to learn about compassion, restraint, and humanity. And so, the story didn't end with a punch, it began with it. Because when cruelty tries to silence dignity, it often underestimates the echo that follows. Eleanor's journey proved that justice can be awakened by pain, but it's carried forward by courage, truth, and love. Marcus remained her guardian, not just in blood, but in mission. And Eleanor, now grandmother to a new generation, told bedtime stories not of fear, but of standing tall. Her scars became symbols. Her voice a call to action. And her son's promise? That no one ever again would have to suffer alone and unseen.